G'day everyone, we're back. Two Ordinary Cops. How are you, Shilty?
Yeah, good mate. What's mate? I believe you're in another new location. Where are you now?
Mate, for those playing along, I'm at the Bondi State Forest Lodge, south of Bombala. So we're right on the Victorian border in the middle of the Bondi State Forest. We're doing a fire camp. We're going to set fire to a heap of things, and hopefully everyone will be able to put it out. So it's good. It's been a good week. These fire
That's
camps are pretty good, actually. They're like school camp for firefighters. It's really good fun.
all right. Oh,
Mm.
shit. Well, that's all right. Oh, mate, I've got just a couple of shout outs. And we'll go through it first. I think I sent you one during the week from Ava. Basically, they're looking at hopefully getting into South Australian Police, or SAPOL, as we call it. And they just asked if basically they've got a best mate who's a cop, and just any suggestions on how approach talking about the job to a like from a non-cop perspective, just to learn more about it. So, mate, I gave a couple of insights into. Oh, geez, I can't hold on. Yeah, basically, I said I don't chat to people for three reasons. One, they don't have the ability to understand. Two, they can't handle the truth and will judge. And three,
Mm.
I don't want to put trauma on innocent people. You got any more you want to add to that? Yeah,
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is we're just people. Like it's just have a yarn. We can talk about anything. Talk about the footy. It doesn't
yeah,
matter. If you want to talk about policing, that's fine. Ask. Most of us are pretty happy to talk about the job. Um, the big thing I get all the time is, oh yeah, you're in the police. Oh yeah, I got done 63 and a 60 is like, man, we were chasing cars to aggravated robberies. We weren't booking people for that. So it's, you know, I think the majority of the population, I've said it before, they only really deal with traffic matters and they think that's all police do. So
yep,
just understand there's a lot more that happens and just ask questions. If you're curious, a lot of people, a lot of coppers will appreciate if you just ask questions. And if you
yep.
are genuinely curious in the job, yeah, ask questions. And we're just people. We're not big, scary, furry monsters. It's okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I don't know, mate. Your face scares a lot of few people.
well, I can't help that. It is what it is. It's not free.
And I will give a quick shout out to Jack Thomas as well. He's looking to get into Q poll. So I'm gonna have a talk to a couple of my Queensland mates, see if I can get what he should expect in way of legislation. When you're going into training in the Queensland, I imagine it's probably pretty similar to the NT. Off the top
Yeah,
of
I still like. Yeah, okay. You can read up a bit on legislation, but you're going to learn all that there. The biggest thing would be still, like we said in the last or one of the episodes, was be fit and just go in with a really open mind and just ask a lot of questions, and that's probably the best bet.
Yeah, definitely. So a big shout out to Jack and Ava. So thanks for reaching out,
Yeah.
um, mate. The other so basically what we're going to talk about today. We got a message a while ago from a Daniel, basically in relation to talking about like basically like friends we've lost in the police or talking about suicide in general, as you go through the job. So just a caveat to everybody listening, this is going to it could be quite dark and all that sort of thing. And if you need to reach out, you can call either helpline or even get in contact with us. But like we always say, the best thing is to talk about it. And the reason I've decided to talk about it today was we were talking about it yesterday, what we're going to chat about. And I ran into a friend who have recently had a family member commit suicide. And it kind of hit me, and I thought, well, it's probably this is a good opportunity to open more, I suppose, the conversation up about it, and talk about it. It's a dark subject, but it's one that I suppose we see it more and more in day to day life, especially with the social media and all that sort of thing. So,
Mm.
mate, do you want to open it up and what do you got to say about that?
Yeah, mate. So I think there's two things we can talk about. I think the first thing is police responding. I've attended heaps of suicides. It's something in society we don't hear about because the media doesn't report on them. The thing with a suicide is it could be a very big emergency response, so there'll be a lot of noise and a lot of lights and sirens going to a location, and then there's media silence. No one says anything about what happened, and word can get around, and it's probably a good thing. People don't report on it, as in the media doesn't report on it. but yeah, from police attending, I attended my first suicide really junior. I went to heaps, probably 30 or 40 suicides as a copper,
Yeah,
attending, both investigating and just as first on scene. And they ranged from the ways people do things. A lot of hangings. I went to one gunshot to the head, which is pretty graphic. And then a few other different things. I've been to a lot of attempt suicides as well, where we've had medical intervention that's actually saved their lives. Not me doing CPR, I might add, but yeah, we've got them back. So I think police early on, when you attend these things, they rock you a bit, because it's like, this person, what made a person so sad that they took their own life? Like, I know it's common enough, but when you think
yeah,
about it in absolute reality, um, it's easy, I'll kill myself, whatever else, but it's to actually go through with it. That's how bad must things be that there's no possible way out. And that's what we look at with the attendance. So from the investigative point of view, a lot of the time, it's a fairly standard thing. You turn up and you obviously got a deceased person, or a person who's receiving medical intervention but then dies from what appears to be self-inflicted, either injuries or in a hanging. It's still an injury, I suppose. But what happens? That's just the practical. You've got to be objective. All right, is this definitely a suicide? Is this maybe staged as staged to be a suicide, but is actually a homicide? So you've got to look at the evidence to start with, and then there's a coronial investigation as well. So we have to be fairly objective in that. So we go through it and work out what's caused the death, or what's the method that they've used, and how would that cause death. And then obviously there's the forensic pathology side of it that proves that that's what did cause the death. But then we do the background as to what might cause that person to have done what they've done. And that involves a pretty standard coronial investigation, looking at their circumstances in life, speaking to people who knew them, their loved ones and work colleagues and things like that. So it's a fairly standard coronial investigation. And then obviously a report is produced for the coroner, a coronial file. And that coronial file goes through to the deputy coroner in the first instance. And if they go through and they're happy with the police investigation and the findings that we've come to, they'll generally check it over and sign off on that and issue the death certificate with the cause of death. And there's no need for an inquest. When there is circumstances where it's in the public interest for something to change in society to prevent this happening again, we've had a couple of high-profile teenage girls, and there's a lot of people, but teenage girls who've committed suicide because of bullying. Something like that might go to an inquest, because it may be that there's policies required to be put in place that prevent that happening in the future. That's the most tragic thing I can possibly imagine. A young tween or teenage girl being bullied to the point where there's no way out. They have to kill themselves. It's just horrendous. So if we can put policies in place, and that's the role of the coroner, to identify what issues have happened and how we can prevent it happening. It's the biggest thing with them from a police point of view is you've got to remain objective, but you're going to be dealing with family and friends who are just devastated by this. When someone's killed in an accident, it's still devastating. It's still a tragedy, but there's been an external force that's caused this person to pass away. When they've killed themselves, it's way worse on the family. There's a lot of blame that goes on. Why did we not pick this up? What caused them to be so down that they felt that was the only way out? And it really carries on to the family and friends of that person. It has a massive effect on them, more so than just a death in an accident or of natural causes. So it's a devastating thing that has a ripple effect right through the community. And we saw that firsthand, especially when you have to be the one talking to everyone and receiving all the information from the family to produce that file, that coronial file. So, I like a saying that I heard, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And that to me is very true. And it's one of the, it was never good. There's never positive. There's not a lot of humor involved. There's nothing funny. You deal with that. You sort of just deal with it quietly and move on. But I dealt with lots that were just shocking. I dealt with quite a few teenagers as well who'd done it in areas around the territory. And a lot of that was to do with bullying and isolation. And it's never It's never good. Like the person might kill themselves, but they basically kill their parents and their family as well. They will change their family forever. They'll forever be that stigma that's happened.
Yeah,
So it's a thing that it's like this quiet thing in society that's pretty common, but is devastating. It really is to everybody.
yeah.
What are your thoughts,
I,
mate? This is more police responding to it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, mate. Yeah, like definitely. I just want to add a couple of things. Like you said,
Mm,
it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It's that's one of the ways of looking at it. And look, I'll just give some people from my perspective. When I was growing up, like one of the first people I suppose that ever even mentioned I was only a teenager when he spoke about it. And this guy was in his 50s at this stage, but he'd basically gone broke twice, in his life, and like basically to the point that they were coming after him to get all the money out of him, and he said at one stage he actually had a gun to his head, and then he thought, well, that's it. He said, what can the fuckers get out of me? He
mm,
said nothing. So I've got everything to go for, and he ended up becoming a multimillionaire.
mm,
So it's one of those decisions. I've also, well, in fact, two people that have been influential in my life. I won't mention them, but both of them had brothers that committed suicide. And
mm,
one of them said to me, he said, "Well, he said if you've got nothing, if you're going to give everything up, then you've got everything to live for. So if
yeah,
you're
that's
rock
right.
bottom, you can only go up from there." So I know that's not the mindset of a lot of people when they're in that, but it's one of the ways I suppose I look at things through my life because I got that advice when I was younger. For anybody else, and I will give a shout out to, I read a book recently from Keith Banks. He was in Queensland, CERT, for many,
Mm,
many, many years. He was very, very involved in that. He was actually there when it all started off. And he wrote a book saying, gun to the head. For anybody that's a cop or not a cop, it affected me in different ways because I have been a cop, and it's quite emotional. I definitely shed a tear a couple of times through the book, but it is. He talks about one incident where he thought he would take his own life, and how he turned that around, and what it was more his perception that was incorrect, than anything else. And so, if for anybody who wants a really good read, I will give that a read because that probably talks, especially for police. I
mm,
think because we've had a few, police suicides. So for anybody that just have a read of it and see what he has to say.
yeah.
Because this guy, I mean, he's probably got more the spine version of PTSD.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think I think it's reasonable. And yeah, I mean, mate, and also in relation to the other stuff, I mean, you're far more experienced than I am in coronial, especially when it comes to suicide. I dealt with a lot of attempt suicides.
Mm,
I had one. I think shout out to Ben Udi. I was working with him one night, and this girl, basically called up saying she's going to kill herself, and we went out to the location, and the front door was locked, but we could see her through the window. And as soon as we got there, she basically jumped off the counter with a noose around her neck, which was tied to a fan. And we kicked the door in and lifted her up. She was all right. We saved her, but that was more of a cry for help. She waited until we got there. I mean, it's possible they can kill themselves though. Like if we couldn't get that door in and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, when I think about that, that was pretty traumatic as a police officer going to that sort of stuff. When you think back on it at the time, you don't really think about it, but I suppose the problem is in hindsight, you sit there and go, "What could have been?" Um,
yeah.
but yeah, mate. I like when it comes to actually investigating suicides. I think you're the best person to talk from that point,
Yeah, I mean,
especially.
and it's interesting you mentioned the attempt. So, as a negotiator, especially, we get called to quite a few people who are threatening suicide, like heaps, lots of them, over 30
Yeah,
in my time. So, I'll never forget talking to one who had a crossbow pointed at a police car. He wanted suicide by cop, and I was talking to him on the phone. And so I'm negotiating with him, and I think the way I got around it was he said, I want them to shoot me. They're in that car right now. If I point a crossbow at them, they're going to shoot me. and I don't think he realised that there were TRG members close by. Tactically, they were hiding in the garden bed, and anyway, I got to the point I'd established enough rapport with him that I was able to eventually talk him down, and then TRG were able to make an intervention and actually take him into custody and into care anyway. So we saved that one, but I spoke to him at the back of the ambulance when we were taking him up to hospital for a mental health assessment, and he sort of said, "I'm actually glad I didn't do it. Like I don't know, it's a bit real now. I didn't." And like you said, it's that I've hit rock bottom. I can come back up. Now I don't know his outcome, but it was funny that his mindset had changed already. He was in the back of an ambulance. He's only just been apprehended by police for a mental health assessment. We weren't charging him with any offences, even though there were offences there, because it was weird when it was real, when it was right there, and it's like, bloody hell, those police have got real guns, and if I point this at them, they will shoot me dead. He sort of understood that that's not what I want. I don't want that. I want something else. So that, like you said, that rock bottom, there's only one way up. So unfortunately, a lot of people don't get that, and they carry out the act, and that's the end of that. There's no coming back from that. So yeah, from the response point of view, I've dealt with both, and so have you. Like, dealt with the deed being done, and then dealing with the family, and then I think the rewarding ones are when you can prevent it by negotiating and intervening. They're rewarding jobs. They're very full on. You're dealing with life and death, literally life and death, over the phone or face to face, talking to someone who's at the absolute bottom and is a very desperate and quite dangerous, I might add. They might not have the courage is the wrong word, but they might not have the fortitude to do it themselves. But they say, well, if I get shot, then that's easy. I'm dead. So they can act in a way that means police have to provide lethal force. And I think everyone's sort of aware of that suicide by cop saying that is out there. So I think we can move on to, that's us dealing with the public going through this. Unfortunately, there's a high prevalence within police, emergency services, especially military veterans, where you're talking about high-performing people who, and a lot of the time through PTSD, do find that the fact they just can't continue. They can't live with the demon in their head, and the only way out is suicide. And even the most spectacular people, in my time, I've had 6 police that I knew die, and 3 of them were suicide. So it rocks you. And 2 of them were good friends. One was a very good mate, and one was a good mate. Like I'd work with him a bit, but we'd see each other all the time. So, and we got along really well. So, and that was devastating because he was a very popular, long-serving copper. There were 2 that were really long-serving members. Well, all 3 of them really. But yeah, one of them, I think what affected a lot of people with him was he was so strong. He was a fella who'd been the linchpin for a lot of people. Like, they'd go to traumatic jobs, and this particular person he was a high-ranking police officer, but still operational. And he would pull the crew together, and he had this excellent way of getting everyone over the line with really bad jobs and sort of making them all feel better about himself. So when he was out of the job, and he did that himself, I think that's what rocked a lot of the coppers. They go, my God, if that can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. Like, how did he get so low? He was always so happy and positive and so supportive to everybody else. But I think the trouble was he was dipping into his own bucket for the sake of other people, that bucket of courage that we talk about. I think his bucket had been dry for a long time, and he'd been scraping the bottom of it. I think he dealt with so many things and just had so many demons in his head that it just got so hard and he couldn't do it anymore. I think that was the same for another fella, and my good mate's circumstances were slightly different, but I also think there was a lot of trauma in his career as well. And just to get to that point where that's it, we're out, and it just devastates the police force. Like, it's just, especially when they're this sounds harsh, but all 3 of them were well-known, long-serving, well-respected. And I think it was just that cumulative trauma. And they're also guys who you would never think there was something wrong. And that's the trouble. And that's why we say, talk about this stuff. You've got to get it out there. And I know this, are you okay? It's a bit of a throwaway, wanky sort of thing, but it's real. And I think the biggest thing is, if you do ask the question, are you okay? Be prepared for someone to say no, and then have some idea of what to do. And just, I think, like you said, the rock bottom, I think we're so lucky that I don't feel affected by PTSD every day. I I get the odd thing where I go, that's probably just the old ankle twist again playing up, but I don't. It certainly doesn't dominate my life. But for guys where there's no other way out, it must just dominate their life.
Yeah.
And that's that snap spine version that I talk about. So yeah, I think we're getting a lot better. I think police in general are getting a lot better at this. And we talk from police because that's our experience, but there's lots of organisations that deal with the trauma of community constantly. Police, fire, emergency services, ambulance, especially. They're dealing with the trauma of community and the jobs they go to and the things they see in the civilian world accumulate, and that causes them to have major problems that they don't see a way out. I think the other thing we can talk about is the military veterans.
Yeah.
And from what I've spoken to, and obviously the very high suicide rate in returning veterans, and I don't know the numbers, but I can guarantee that there's far more Afghanistan veterans have died in Australia by their own hand than were ever killed in action in Afghanistan. So I think there's a few things there, and I would be happy to be corrected by somebody who knows more than I do. But from what I see from the military guys returning, there is nothing like a sense of purpose when you're in Afghanistan. A lot of people would think you're in a war zone, it must just be horrendous. A lot of people say, no, it was, I've never felt so alive as when I was on operations. You live in life and death all the time. You've never had a sense of purpose and never will again, like being on active operations in a war zone, Afghanistan, Iraq, somewhere like, or Vietnam, anywhere. You're a very important 19-year-old boy when you're walking through the bush with a rifle and you've been given a briefing by your section commander about what you're going to do, and what you're doing is it doesn't get more serious than taking human life in order to carry out an objective. So you've operated at this extreme level of the raw edge of humanity, and then you return to an extremely first world country like Australia, and people who you've respected your whole life, like your parents and your grandparents and people in society, you just can't relate to them anymore. And they might, and sometimes it's that those people in Australia, their insecurity about how to talk to you, they treat you like you're still just 19, 20, go on, young fella, all this sort of stuff. And it's like, young fella, go to buggery. Have you ever walked through the bush and dealt with this shit? Like, I'm not young. A veteran will go over there and mature decades in their own brain, but they're not any more years older.
Yeah.
And I think they completely lose, especially if they separate from the service, so they become civilians. They have all this purpose and all this responsibility for a very young person, and that's all stripped away when they come back, and they're not treated with that respect that they had when they were overseas. And I think the second part to that is they've also witnessed some really wild stuff. They may have seen other humans killed, friends killed, themselves in situations where they thought they were sure they were going to be killed themselves. So your body goes into the old PTSD. It's PTSD, but it's that adrenaline response where your survival switch is flicked. And like we've said before, you can't flick it off. Once it's on, it's on.
Yeah.
So they then have to learn to deal with that hypervigilance and those flashbacks to extreme events and all the rest of it. So they could be dealing with quite a serious mental health issue that needs to be dealt with. And they've also lost all that purpose. So I can certainly see how it just plunges them down to as low as you can go. And I think that relates to police as well when you get out. I mean, I'll use myself as an example, but it was certainly not to that level. It was a loss of purpose, but it was never to the point of, that this is all going to end. I can't handle this. It was just why people don't know what I've done. It's sort of, hang on, I've done a lot of things. Or why I'm sort of being treated like a bit of a fool here. And I was
Yeah.
sensitive to it, and it took a long time to just realise that people don't know what you've done. They've got no idea. They can't possibly relate to anything I've done. And that's not taken away from them. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are your thoughts there, mate?
Mate, yeah, I think look, you touched on a few things, and especially in relation to the bloke that helped a lot of people out, and it was when he left the police, and I think it's for people that have been in long term, it's a little bit harder, especially when it's been your whole life and you've been so important for say 30, 40 years or something like that. It must get, if you've got no purpose once you get out, I think they miss helping people if you know to
Mm.
if you know and I think that's probably part of it. They kind of feel useless. and I think that's where we should be better in looking after people, especially the people even like Bob Rennie that's been in for like 40 years,
Mm.
or close to 40 years. We be reaching out and like they've got to. I mean, he's all right. He's got his kids and family and all that to do stuff for, but he's always active. But if you kind of it's like any. I mean, that's why they had the men's shed. Just going away from the police to give some people purpose after they've finished their careers. But I think policing is that because you do miss the importance. You miss being called on. You miss as much as you hate it when you're in the job, you miss it when you're out.
Mm.
And I think, one of the things I knew, so I left about 5 years before you, and I knew when you were talking about leaving, I'd have to, I was conscious of the fact of the emotions you would be going through because I went through the same things. When you leave, and what you said is exactly right.
Mm.
You got people talking to you going, you've got no idea what I've done.
Yeah.
And that's just just the fact. But I think, look, one thing, look, part of this podcast is also trying to, I suppose, educate and talk about and open up these conversations so people feel a bit more able to talk about it. Because if we can talk about it, then other people might be able to talk about it. But it's also partly I was a training officer for a while, and I really, it's a hard job, training recruits straight out of the college, but it's really rewarding as well when you do it well and you can watch them, I suppose, blossom. If and it's, I think part of this I enjoy is also for those young recruits. If they listen to this, they can actually get a bit of an idea. And I suppose, it gives you a bit of foresight into what it's going to be like or what it can be like or how other people handled it. Because it's a bit like our police club, mate. This
Mm.
is this is what this podcast is, a lot. We're just chatting. Well, we're not having a beer this morning because it is not that we haven't had a beer at 7 o'clock in the morning, mate, but we have got jobs to do today. But it's we just chat over a beer, and that's opening that conversation to have a talk about it, because I think the most important thing is talking about it. And going back to suicide, it's like you said, it's harshest to the people that are close to them, and they sit there, and you will go through what if I, why didn't I not talk to them, or why? It's look, at the end of the day, they did that. There's probably very little you could have done to prevent it. Yes, there
Yeah.
probably is some things in hindsight, but hindsight's a wonderful thing when you're
Yeah.
looking back. But you can't go back, and you can sit there and question yourself all you want, but the fact is people live busy lives and they have their own drama going on. So for everybody else that thinks, I'm always a big one of sitting there thinking that, when my life's pretty bloody good, really. But
Mm.
whenever I sit there and feel down, I say, well, there's people far worse off than I am. And I know, and I recognize that everybody has got their own shit to go through.
Mm.
Some are worse than others. So don't, especially for that friend of mine. If you listen to this, I know it's hard, but don't feel like you're responsible,
Yeah.
because that person made the decision off their own back, to do that. And you can always look back and say, "What if?" But you're never going to have that question answered. So,
No.
it's mate. You got anything more to add to that?
Yeah. So, just going back, I think the continue on from anyone who's getting out of any kind of services and things like that, when you do feel that, and you all will, if you've done any length of time in emergency services or the military, or especially deployed military, understand that this is a normal. It's a normal thing. It takes a lot of maturity, and I had to mature a bit, and it was it was almost an ego thing. It's like, don't treat me like a fool. I'm not a fool. I've done things that, and I used to get a bit nasty, and I'd go, I've done things you couldn't imagine, and I'd get cranky with being treated almost condescending comments and things like that. It's normal that those people aren't necessarily being condescending towards you. It's just an ignorance as to what you've done and your experience. So there's two things to this. One is that's a normal response and it's uncomfortable and it's going to be a pain in your butt. And you're going to, like I think I said in a previous one, getting out of any of those services is like throwing a boulder in a bucket. The bucket being your life, everything's pretty stable. A boulder makes everything splash. It's a massive change in your life. You've got incredible transferable skills. If you've come from any of that sort of thing, you've got skills in society which the vast majority of society doesn't have, and you could potentially still be quite young. You've got a lot to offer society. You mightn't know what that is yet, but you just keep looking for it. Find something you're passionate about, and then use your learned experience to enhance the world in a different way. And I think I'm really lucky. I've fallen into this training job, and I just love it. All of a sudden, it's pure purpose. You don't know what you know, so your transferable skills. You'll be in the front of a crowd thinking that you're an imposter because what would I know about this? And all of a sudden you go, no, actually, I know quite a bit about this, and I've got a lot of experience to go back on and to present to people. And what I find is you're in a classroom situation. I often found that there'll be murmurings when you're going through pretty mundane things, but part of what I have to talk about is working in a team and critical incident stress around bushfires and things like that. And when I start talking about experiences, and I relate policing, but it's irrelevant. The fact that fire or policing, it's the same thing. Um, the room goes silent. Everyone's listening. It's like, wow, never done that before. And it's that gives me the purpose back. So that's just my example. Your example could be anything. If you're any example, if you've all got talented, you've all got talent, you've all got transferable skills, and they will far exceed what a lot of people in society have got. And find out where you can still have that impact in the world, and you'll regain that purpose, and your life will be great because you're outside that extreme traumatic stress of the emergency services. You can look back on it and use your experience to enhance the world. And I'm really lucky I get to prioritize family now. So um, there's definitely light at the end of that tunnel when you first leave. And a lot of people get out for different reasons. And I think you've got to look back on the decision to leave and go, no, that was the correct decision, or whether it was or wasn't for each individual person. And then, yeah, I think the takeaway is reapply yourself in something else, get back into life, and use your experience to enhance the world.
Yep. Yeah,
Mm.
mate. I actually, yeah, funny. I've always said, and sometimes I start when I do it because people occasionally ask us to do talks and all that sort of thing. And one of the ones I always sit there and say, I talk about the two best decisions I've ever made in my life. The first one was joining the Northern Territory Police, and the second one was leaving it.
Yeah,
I definitely left at the right time. There's probably, is there probably a little bit of regret? A little bit, but I knew I was cooked at the time, and to keep on going, I would have had to make some absolute massive changes.
mm.
It was just I was at the end of my tether, and when you really look back, I really was. I was pushing. I mean, I think you said it a couple of times. An ordinary person would be dead. I was just working around the clock. It was absolutely crazy,
You
but
were you were climbing a hill that kept getting taller,
yeah.
regardless. The more you climbed it, the higher the mountain got.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah, so I think I left at the right time. And look, there's probably a couple of different scenarios that could have happened, but it didn't. And I'm not going to look back on that. But the thing is having a purpose when you come out, and part of mine was always I part of the reason why I left was because I wanted to help the police force more. And I
mm,
didn't feel that I could do it in my capacity as being a police officer.
mm.
And part of it was to influence politics, but that's like banging your head against a brick wall. I can tell you what, the Northern Territory or the police force is a well-oiled machine compared to politics. I can tell you
Yeah,
that right now.
that's right.
Um,
Yeah,
but the other one is also just chatting to people, trying to get the information out there about what it's like to be a police officer, to get people to recognise what police do day in day out, and
mm,
and I think that's part of this podcast is partly designed to do that. Um,
yeah,
yeah, which I like to do, and a lot of people, we've had a lot of feedback from people over the years. I'll give a shout out to Ray Wilson. He said to me the other day, he said, "I think it's really good what you guys are doing."
mm,
Talking about trying to pass on, not talking about what we've done, but also passing on experience to help the younger generation, because that I think that's important. Society needs to open up that conversation a little bit more
yeah.
about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, definitely. So I think maybe we don't have to go on too much longer, but I think a few takeaways are: one, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I think that's a big takeaway. That's not my saying, but I like it.
Yep.
If you're at the rock bottom, and these are not throwaway words, I get it. If you're at the rock bottom and you're thinking that words don't mean a lot, but there's always a way out. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be brutally hard, but there's always a way out. There's something to go to. You're going to keep breathing. You're going to keep eating. Just go one more minute, one more minute, one more minute, and all of a sudden you've finished the day, and then wake up the next day and go one more minute. Push through. Stay positive. For what it's worth, it's if you're going through the bottom. I think it was Winston Churchill. If you're going through hell, for God's sake, keep going. So
Yep.
it's really important. You're going to affect a lot of people. You are an important person in the world. You need to stay in the world. If you need to do a really hard thing to fix yourself, do a really hard thing. It'll be worth it. It'll be brutal. There'll be times that are just horrendous, but there's positive at the end. Get inspiration from people who've been there, and then don't isolate yourself. You need to surround yourself by people, and even if you can't possibly see the end state, just keep the end state in your head that I'm going to survive and I'm going to get through this.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. And chat to people.
biggest
I
thing.
mean, that's we've spoken about that 100
The
times.
right
It's
people.
Yeah, the right people. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. And people you trust, and or whether it's psychologists or whatever, but also people you trust. Open up that conversation, and don't be afraid to sit there and go. I'm going through some troubled times, because there's some people. I mean, just going back on just before we finish up, mate. You said when you leave the police, one thing you get in the police is a lot of connections.
yeah,
So you meet a lot of people. You open up a lot of avenues just through your working life, and that's also goes for when you are feeling down. There's a lot of avenues. There's a lot of people that can help you out of a situation. Don't be
mm.
afraid to ask for help, because nobody's invincible. I'm not invincible. You're not invincible.
God no.
Um,
Yeah,
at times people think we are, but we're very far from it.
mm.
So yeah, that's only my advice, mate. And you got anything else to
Yeah.
add before we head off?
No, mate, I think that's it. Yeah, but get in touch. We're interested to hear about anyone. Let us know your experiences, and we'll be back next week. We might have to lighten it up a bit again.
Yeah, I
We
think
do
so. Yeah,
these. We do the serious ones, and we just do.
mate.
I need some funny stuff, guys. Come hit us up with some funny stuff. Tell us some funny stories from interstate. I want to hear
Yeah.
what happens in Melbourne. I want to hear how the Melbourne police or the police in Brisbane. I want to hear how you guys have a
Yep.
laugh, and I know you
Yeah.
all do.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. This is a shout out to the police officer, even over the ditch, mate, in the NZ. If you got something funny, let us know about it.
Yeah,
And but yeah, we'll catch up with you all soon.
absolutely. All the best.
See ya.